Welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about email address policies. Now, what in the world is an email address policy? Well, it's pretty simple. If you stop and think about it for a moment, we've spent a lot of time in this video series setting up Exchange servers. So we've created some Exchange servers, and the whole purpose of an Exchange server is to allow users to send and receive email, right? Well, let me ask you a simple question. We have one user right here. What's that user's email address? Well, if you're looking at the screen, you can see the email address is administrator@posydemo.com. Simple enough. But where did that come from? Well, that's where the email address policy comes into play. The email address policy is what determines the user's email address. So my purpose in this video is to show you how to configure the email address policy. The good news is that it's really easy to do. So as I've already pointed out, I've got the Exchange Admin Center pulled up. And over on the left, we have all of these different tabs that allow us to interact with various functions of Exchange Server. And right here towards the middle, we have one called Mailflow. If I select Mailflow, we have all of these different tabs along the top. Rules, delivery reports, accepted domains, and lo and behold, email address policies. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. Now we have a policy that exists by default called the default policy. Every Exchange Server deployment has a default policy. But you're not limited to creating one single policy. You can have multiple email address policies if you want and apply different policies to different users. Now, in my experience, most organizations choose to just use the default policy because they want every user to have the same email address. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you do have a need for different groups of users to have different addresses, this is how you can accomplish it by setting up different email address policies and then applying those email address policies to the appropriate users. So let's take a look inside of this policy. It's already selected, so I'm just going to go up here and click Edit. So that's going to launch another browser window. It's a little bit cut off, so let me move this to where it's within the view of the video capture software. And you can see that we've got a few different tabs. The General tab is selected by default, and here we have on the General tab the policy name and the priority. Priorities exist for situations in which you have multiple email address policies. Higher priority email address policies take precedence over lower priority policies. Then we have email address format. And you can see that the format is going to be SMTP, that's Simple Mail Transport Protocol. And then the address format is @posydemo.com. So this is where you would set an email address. So let's say I wanted to use something else. If I click Add, I could specify a different domain if I wanted to, and I could structure the email address format. We have all kinds of different options here. We have Smith J, we have S John, we have Smith.John, John S, J Smith, and so on and so forth. So we can essentially use this to choose the format of the user's email address. Now I'm going to go ahead and close out of here, and I'm going to click on the Apply To tab. So here we have specify the types of recipients this email address policy will apply to, and by default, all recipient types is selected. But we can choose only the following recipient types. We can choose users with Exchange mailboxes, mail users with external email addresses, resource mailboxes, mail contacts with external email addresses, and mail-enabled groups. So we have quite a bit of flexibility here. Let me go ahead and close this out. And what happens if we wanted to create a brand new email address policy? Well, we could do that by clicking on New, and that's going to open up another browser window. Let me go ahead and position this so you can see it. And the very first thing that we have to do is enter a policy name. I'll just call this one Test. And the remaining options are very similar to what you've already seen. For example, we have email address format. If I were to click plus, I'm taken back to this screen, which you've seen before, where I could specify an accepted domain and then the structure of the email address. I'll go ahead and cancel out of this. And then we have run this policy in this sequence with other policies. So here we can choose precedence if multiple policies exist. And then we can choose what types of recipients the email address policy will apply to. Now, I don't really need a policy called test, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of this, but I just wanted to take a moment and show you what options existed for creating policies. Now, for this video and subsequent videos in this video series, I'm just going to go with the default policy. But one thing that I do want to do is I want to show you how this policy gets applied. So if I select a user and I click on Edit, then this is going to bring up another browser window. Let me position this to make it a little easier to see. And you'll notice that we have an email address tab. And if I click on that, we can see the user's email address, and we have options to add or edit an address. Now, if I click on add, we don't have any option to pick an email address policy, but that's what's actually going on behind the scenes. And the same thing with editing. This makes reference to an email address policy, but we're not actually picking and choosing email address policies. So it's a little bit confusing, but email address policies are at work behind the scenes. So let me cancel out of this, and I'll try to give you a more concrete example. So what I want to do now is I want to define a new accepted domain. An accepted domain is a domain that the Exchange organization can receive email on behalf of. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Mailflow, and I've got a tab right here marked accepted domains. I'll go ahead and click on that. And you can see Posey Demo, and that is an accepted domain, and the domain type is authoritative. So let me go ahead and add in another accepted domain. I'll click New. And what we need to do now is enter a name and an accepted domain. So I'm going to type Posey as the name, and I'll enter posey.com as the accepted domain. Now, I don't actually own the posey.com domain name. I wish I did, but this is a lab environment, and we're not actually going to be receiving mail from the real world, so this will work fine for our purposes. And then we can choose an accepted domain type. We have authoritative, internal relay, and external relay. I'll go with authoritative and click Save. And now you can see that Posey is added to our list of accepted domains. So with that said, let's go back to email address policies. And what I want to do now is create a new email address policy. So I'm going to go up here and click New, and that's going to bring up the same dialog box that you saw earlier. And we have to enter a policy name. I'm just going to call this Posey. And then we have to enter an email address format. So I'm going to click Add, and then we have to choose an accepted domain. I'm going to choose posey.com from the drop-down list, and I'm just going to go with the default format and click Save. Now, when I click Save again, we're going to get an error message, and this is related to my browser. I'm using Microsoft Edge, by the way. And you can see the error, the address SMTP undefined is invalid. The SMTP email address template undefined is invalid. So that's kind of a problem. So let me click OK, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch back over to my Exchange server, and I've got a browser open. This time I'm using Internet Explorer, so we're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to click Add, and that's going to open up that dialog box. Policy name, I'll call this Posey, and then email address format, I'm going to click Add, and we'll choose posey.com. I'll click Save, and click Save again. And this time I get a warning message that the policy isn't active yet, and to click Apply in the Details pane to apply the email address policy. So I'll click OK, and now the new email address policy shows up, and it's unapplied. So if I want to apply it, I can click Apply, and I see another warning saying applying this email address policy may take a long time to finish. During the update, you won't be able to perform other tasks. Well, that's fine. I'll click Yes, and it takes just a moment to apply that new email address policy. So let me click Close, and I'm going to go back up to Recipients, and let's take a look at what we've got. So my administrator account is still showing administrator@poseydemo.com as the email address. Let's go ahead and refresh the browser just to make sure that that's still what shows up. And you'll notice that now it says administrator@posey.com. And if I click Edit, we can go to email address, and we have two different email addresses to choose from. So you can see that Exchange is pulling in those email address policies. So let me go ahead and cancel out of this, and I want to go back to my email address policy. So I'm going to go to Mailflow and email address policies, and I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the Posey policy because I don't want to mess up anything that we're going to be doing later on, because Posey Demo is my real domain name that I've used for the Exchange organization. I just created Posey for demonstration purposes. So let me go ahead and get rid of this. And you can see that I get that warning message again saying this is going to take a long time. So I'm going to double check to make sure that I've got the correct domain selected, and click Yes. And you can see that Posey is being removed. And it didn't take long because I've only got one mailbox. So I'll click Close and go back to Recipients. And the old email address is still showing. So I'm going to click Refresh. And now we're back to administrator@poseydemo.com. So that's just a preview of how email address policies work.